Hey, Discern listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, a new season of The Single Life. Let's watch.
And then Josh told me something that I wasn't expecting.
So I have 2 kids with 2 different women. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So she's in her late 30s. I think he's similar age. Most people you're going to date are going to have past relationships, and a lot are going to have kids from previous relationships, so it's not unusual. There's certainly nothing wrong with it, right? Doesn't indicate anything about his character or about his availability as a partner, but he reveals, I had a previous relationship, I have 2 kids. Given her issues, this could trigger her, right? This is that imagined indication of abandonment. When you're on the airplane and you're convinced it's going to go down in flames and there's a little noise, you're like, oh, it's the end, it's the end. It's similarly when you are when you have abandonment trauma and you're in a constant state of terror regarding abandonment and betrayal, and then someone that you're dating that you're really having feelings for each other indicates that he has been in another relationship. Just that idea alone, even though it's not rational, it will trigger someone potentially, particularly if you have a high degree of preoccupied attachment insecurity, and that he has kids. So there's a practical part of this, which is like, oh, even if we did get married and fall in love and everything, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time with those kids and this other woman. And instead of seeing it as, well, we'll see what happens, it's catastrophized in the same way that you're terrified of on a plane and you catastrophize every little bump and sensation. Or you're a hypochondriac and you have a little sensation in your stomach. You're like, it's cancer, I'm going to die, or appendicitis or whatever. That's the nature of illness anxiety. So for her, let's see how she manages this one.
First thought was, oh, he can make kids, which is good. But second thought was, I don't know if I want a guy who has kids from 2 different women.
So is it just a judgment, like some sort of value judgment, like he's old goods, used goods or something? Certainly there's a lot of application of that ridiculous oppressive notion to women, but not usually to men. Again, I would suspect that any sort of negativity she would have around that would be the worry of abandonment. And to be specific, for people in her position, they could be triggered by that because it means that you can't have him all to yourself, which isn't likely to happen anyway, right? But it's like, oh, you're already involved with these other kids. And another trigger is, so you committed to someone, maybe got married, had kids, and then the relationship ended, which there's a lot of possibilities. Maybe they dumped him, but again, the catastrophizing is, oh, you're a player, right? You love him and leave him, you have a track record of getting involved and then leaving them, which no one knows. The women could have died for, I don't think that's happened, but there's no way to know. But when you're preoccupied, you fill in the gap with the worst information. Another thing along these lines, another analogy is my parents, particularly my mom. I remember when I was a teenager, I wouldn't check in or something. She wouldn't know where I was. And I would come home and I just noticed like my mom and my parents, particularly my mom, would just be like really out of sorts, very upset. And then it was clear that my mom was really afraid. She was scared. And I think she literally even said something like, when you don't come home and I don't know where you're at, and again, this is before cell phones and all that kind of stuff. So it's just like kids would leave and you just had no idea where they were. My mom said, I imagine that you're dead in a ditch somewhere. And I'm like, wow, that's where your brain goes? I'm just out with friends, we're just doing random stuff. So this catastrophizing is, frequent and in a number of different venues.
It's not normal in my country. No.
Why don't you come out to LA and let me take you around?
But I'm so attracted to him. I just can't stay away. So when Josh invited me to LA, I was like, hell yes.
Take a lot of pictures.
Okay, so it sounds like she managed it enough so that it didn't trigger her. Or I'm wrong about the whole thing, or I'm wrong about that she wasn't triggered in terms of abandonment traumas, but she just has a judgment regarding culture of like 2 kids, different women, and like, what's the judgment there? Like you're immoral or something. And she's a fairly religious person, so maybe it's part of that.
Oh, cute. Can't wait to see you. I'm very busy and I can't make it until I... Josh invited me to LA. He should be on this bus with me, taking selfie, enjoying time. But he says I'm busy.
Okay, I think that this is a normal reaction, actually, because she came from Florida to LA, I think, to see him, seemingly. And she's like, all right, let's hang out. And he's like, oh, I'm busy till 8. And maybe there's a logical explanation for that. But it would be a sign that he's not actually as interested, right? Because when you're infatuated with someone, you'll cancel a lot of things to see someone. We don't know the circumstances, but I just want to point that out because I was like, oh, is this when she's going to get triggered? And maybe she will, but she has actually, I think, viable reasons to be concerned. Not to panic or anything or attack him or break up, but to be like, oh, what's going on? And then if they meet up and things go well, then maybe it'll erase any kind of concern.
I met Josh in a very difficult time of my life, and I feel like a lot vulnerable and insecure. I'm going through a struggle because I really like him a lot. And I will not invest myself, my time, my feelings, my heart into something that will not lead me to what makes me secure. I don't want to get hurt.
Okay, so you kind of hear it in her voice. There's a little bit of anger. I don't know if I'm misperceiving that, but there's no reason at this point for her to be terribly concerned, at least what we've seen. And she says, I'm really into him, I really like him, but I'm not going to be with someone that is going to waste my time. And she's referring to the fact that he works in the modeling industry and has a lot of colleagues who are conventionally attractive. And she's worried about that. And okay, but I would hope that she would have at least part of her plan is, well, I've got to work on two things. One, my attachment insecurity so that I don't get triggered by things that don't make a lot of sense. And two, I have a lot of trust building to do with him. We're in the beginning of the relationship. Of course, I don't trust him at this point because I don't know him. But over time, if our relationship works out and we really set out to establish trust and openness, then maybe after 5 years, most of this jealousy will go away. What she seems to be resorting to is thinking, well, because I think she has an urge, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if she had an urge to pressure him to not work in the industry he's been working in for a long time, which is of course absurd as a request. But I think she knows that she shouldn't do that. So I think she's contemplating ending the relationship. And this is something that preoccupied people will do a lot of the times. And they might even give up on relationships altogether. And people will ask me, they'll be like, I think I'm both preoccupied and avoidant. And they will tell me that presentation where they'll have intense preoccupation and neediness and pursuing and jealousy and anger, and then periods of time where they're avoiding relationships altogether. And they'll say, I'm both avoiding and preoccupied. And the way I would characterize that is that you're blowing out of relationships because they're so intense and chaotic and hard that you are choosing to temporarily avoid relationships, but your preoccupation is still there. It's just a way of managing. It's sort of like you're an alcoholic and you've gotten rid of all the alcohol in your house and you never leave the house, and so you just don't have access to alcohol. It doesn't mean that you don't still suffer from alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, because if you ended up in a place where there was alcohol, you would immediately do that again. So there's that. Now, some people actually do legitimately have presentations of both preoccupation and avoidant, but that's not how I would characterize that. Anyway, so an aspect of preoccupied attachment is this looking into the future. People who with preoccupied attachment are much more likely to look into the future sooner than other people. So within the very beginning stage of a relationship, they're much more likely to think like, okay, marriage and kids and living together and all these kinds of things. And those are good things to think about. But if it causes the individual a lot of stress and they pressure their person that they're dating in the beginning, literally on the first date, sometimes people with preoccupied attachment will start thinking about marriage and these kinds of things. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with dating with the intent of marriage, but most people who don't have those intrusive thoughts that preoccupied people suffer from, they're like, well, let's see how this goes. There's no sense in really trying to evaluate that question at this point. And if you don't have self-awareness around those intrusive thoughts, you try to answer those questions, which can cause a lot of distress for you in the relationship.
I'm afraid that he will reject me. I came to America to build a family and have a child. But I already lost 4 years of my life with Mike. And I'm not doing it again. So now that I'm 37, I need to make sure that Josh wants to be committed and have a family.
Okay, well, let's see how this conversation goes, because there's two styles. One is for her to say, hey, I don't want to pressure you at all. I know we're in the very beginning, but I would just like to know, because this is my goal. Is that at least on the table for you? Is that an option? Not necessarily with me, but with anyone, or are you done with marriage and kids? Is that over for you? Because that, might be kind of a deal breaker. That's why when you're on dating apps, they will often have that indication on your profile of like, wants kids or open to kids, those kinds of questions, because it's such an important part of, because you could be very compatible with someone and disagree on that, and it could just ruin everything, right? So that's one style. The other style is where she pressures him, and any answer other than absolute enthusiasm for those things with her will indicate that he is not a good partner. All right, well, that is it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.